The mountain black woman stepped through the doorway of what she believed was her abandoned ranch, only to find a giant Comanche warrior rising from beside the fireplace. Her travel bags scattered across the wooden floor as shock froze them both in place. Celestia Mayfield had ridden 3 days through Colorado wilderness to reach this moment. The deed in her coat pocket bore her name in careful script. Every dollar of her widow's pension had purchased this solitude, this escape. The man before her stood nearly 7 feet tall. His shoulders filled the narrow cabin like storm clouds gathering in mountain passes. Dark eyes held no malice, only surprise that matched her own. Neither moved. The wind outside pressed against shuttered windows. Snow began tapping the roof in rhythm with her racing heart. She had fled South Carolina at dawn 2 weeks prior. Neighbors there whispered poison about war widows who refused to remarry, about women who spoke too freely, about those who carried themselves with unbent spines despite society's efforts to break them. Her husband Thomas had died at Antietam. His last letter promised they would farm their own land someday, would raise children who knew freedom as birthright rather than gift. The promise had kept her breathing through 3 years of emptiness. The land agent in Denver had sworn the property sat vacant, abandoned after Indian troubles drove off the previous owner. She had paid in gold coins, each one representing months of careful saving. The cabin showed no signs of abandonment. Fresh wood stacked beside the hearth, swept floors, windows recently cleaned. Someone had tended this place with gentle hands. The Comanche warrior stepped sideways. His movements carried the fluid grace of someone accustomed to dangerous spaces. He gestured toward the door, speaking words she did not understand. His tone held no threat. Celestia's fingers found the rifle Thomas had taught her to shoot. The weight felt familiar against her palm. She had carried it across 3 states, through towns where her presence drew stares and whispered comments about uppity-colored women traveling alone. The warrior noticed her weapon. His own hand moved to the tomahawk at his belt, not drawing it, simply acknowledging its presence. His eyes never left her face. Thunder rolled across the peaks outside. The storm she had raced for 2 days was finally arriving. Mountain weather moved fast and struck hard. She knew this from careful study of almanacs and territorial maps. The warrior pointed toward the windows, then shook his head. His meaning cut through language barriers. No one would survive the approaching blizzard in the open. She studied his face for deception. Found none. Only quiet resignation that fate had placed them in this impossible situation. Years of reading people's intentions had kept her alive. Plantation overseers, carpetbaggers, men who smiled while calculating how to use her. This man's expression held different weight. Sadness, perhaps. Loneliness that recognized its reflection. The first real gust of wind rattled the entire structure. Snow began falling in earnest, visible through gaps in the shutters. The storm would trap them here together. Two people who should be enemies by every rule their worlds had written. She lowered the rifle slightly, not surrendering it, but no longer pointing it at his chest. He responded by removing his hand from the tomahawk. They remained frozen in this delicate balance. Her near the door with escape impossible. Him beside the fire that would keep them both alive through the coming cold. The deed in her pocket proclaimed her ownership of this land. His presence suggested a different claim, one written in months of careful maintenance and quiet habitation. Wind howled through the peaks now. The sound carried the promise of 3-day storms that buried everything in white silence. She had studied weather patterns before making this journey, had planned for every possibility except this one. The warrior gestured toward the fire, then toward her. An invitation to warmth, to survival. Celestia stepped fully inside and closed the door behind her. The latch fell into place with finality. Whatever happened next would happen here, in this small space that somehow belonged to both of them and neither. They stood separated by 10 feet of wooden floor and a lifetime of reasons to fear each other. Outside, the storm began its siege. Inside, two refugees from different wars faced the strange mathematics of shared necessity. The fire crackled between them. Its light danced across walls that had witnessed their collision, the beginning of something neither could have imagined in their separate journeys toward this mountain sanctuary. The blizzard held them prisoner for 3 days. Wind carved howling warnings against the cabin walls. Snow piled against windows until day and night blurred into one endless gray twilight. They divided the space without words. Celestia claimed the eastern wall near her scattered belongings. The warrior kept to the western side where his few possessions lay arranged with military precision. An invisible line ran down the center of the room that neither crossed. Communication came through necessity. He pointed to the woodpile when it ran low. She nodded toward the water bucket when it needed filling. Their movements became a careful dance around each other's existence. On the second morning, Celestia discovered her travel pack had been disturbed. Papers scattered when she had dropped her bags. Someone had gathered them neatly. Too neatly. Among the documents lay a wanted poster she had found tacked to a tree 3 days prior. The crude drawing showed a tall Indian with distinctive scars across his left cheek. The same scars that marked the man sharing her shelter. $500 reward for a Comanche renegade named in the poster as Tall Thunder. Her hands trembled as she read the crimes listed. Raiding supply wagons, attacking settlements, the kind of violence that justified any response from civilized folk. The warrior watched her from across the room. His eyes found the poster in her grip. No fear crossed his features, only resignation that spoke of a man accustomed to being hunted. Celestia folded the paper and placed it beneath her other documents. $500 would buy land in California, a fresh start where no one knew her story, where widows faced fewer whispered judgments, but she kept the poster hidden. That evening, she noticed him studying papers of his own, documents he had clearly retrieved from her belongings when tidying them. His expression grew thoughtful as he examined what appeared to be legal certificates, her freedom papers, the precious documents proving her status as a free woman rather than escaped property. Papers that had kept her alive through 3 states of suspicious sheriffs and bounty hunters seeking easy profit. He set them aside carefully. Their eyes met across the invisible boundary. Two people carrying secrets that could destroy them both. The warrior rose and moved to his pack, retrieved a small leather pouch and approached the center line of their shared space. He set the pouch down and stepped back. Celestia approached cautiously. Inside the pouch lay dried meat, expertly prepared and seasoned with herbs she did not recognize, enough protein to supplement their dwindling supplies for several days. She returned to her pack and brought out a small tin of preserved peaches, a luxury she had saved for special occasions. She placed it beside his offering, their first trade completed in silence. On the third day, the storm began to weaken. Wind died to whispers. Snow fell in lazy spirals rather than driving sheets. Soon the mountain would release its grip on them. The warrior began preparing his pack. His movements carried the efficiency of someone accustomed to sudden departures. To running. Celestia watched him organize his few possessions, a blanket worn soft by years of use, tools crafted by skilled hands, medicine pouches that spoke to knowledge of healing rather than hurting. Nothing in his careful preparations suggested the violent raider described in the wanted poster. His hands moved with the precision of someone who valued rather than destroyed, who built rather than burned. She found herself memorizing his movements, the way he tested each knot twice, how he arranged his supplies for easy access, the gentle respect he showed for tools that had served him faithfully. When he finished packing, he stood at the window and studied the weather. His fingers traced patterns on the glass that might have been words in a language she could not read. The storm was ending. Soon, they would face the choice of what came next. Celestia pulled the wanted poster from her pack and stared at the crude drawing. $500 represented freedom from a past that followed her even into these remote mountains. freedom from the whispers and judgments of a world that saw her as property rather than person. She looked across the room at the man who had shared his food with her, who had respected the invisible boundaries she had drawn, who had gathered her scattered papers with the care one showed precious things. The poster crumpled in her fist. She fed it to the fire and watched the lies burn to ash. The warrior turned from the window as flames consumed his death warrant. His eyes found hers across the diminishing space between their separate worlds. Outside, the wind carried new weather toward them, the promise of clear skies and open roads, of choices that would define what happened when the storm finally released them from this strange sanctuary they had shared. The storm cleared, but neither left. Morning sun carved sharp shadows through cabin windows. The invisible line between their territories began to blur. Celestia found him repairing the roof where wind had torn loose several shingles. His movements spoke of months of such care. This was not temporary shelter for him. This was home. She watched him work from below, each nail driven with precision, each board tested for soundness before securing, the hands of someone who built rather than destroyed. When he climbed down, she pointed to herself and spoke slowly. "Celestia," he nodded and touched his chest. Tall Thunder, the name fit him. Power held in careful control. Strength that could shake mountains but chose gentleness instead. Over the following days, they began teaching each other words. She pointed to objects and spoke their English names. He repeated them in his deep voice, then offered their Comanche equivalents: fire, water, bread, home. Each shared word dissolved another layer of strangeness between them. Celestia discovered he had been maintaining the ranch for 8 months. The previous owner had died of winter fever, leaving no family to claim the property. Tall Thunder had found the body and buried it with proper ceremony. He had stayed because the place reminded him of his grandmother's lodge, the way morning light struck the eastern windows, how evening shadows fell across the wooden floors. She realized the land agent in Denver had sold her property that legally belonged to no one, that her deed meant nothing in a territory where ownership shifted with violence and abandonment. But Tall Thunder made no claim to supersede hers. Instead, he showed her improvements he had made: a root cellar dug behind the cabin, fence posts set for a future garden, a small stable built to shelter horses through harsh weather. Work done by someone planning to stay, to build a life rather than simply survive. One afternoon, ice beneath the creek gave way as Celestia fetched water. The shock of mountain runoff drove breath from her lungs. Current pulled her toward deeper pools downstream. Tall Thunder reached her before the water could claim her. His arms lifted her from the creek with ease that spoke of great strength held in careful reserve. He carried her to the cabin and built up the fire while she changed into dry clothes. Later, as warmth returned to her limbs, she found him preparing medicinal tea from herbs in his pack. The same hands that wanted posters claimed brought violence now moved with healer's precision. "You are medicine man," she said in her broken attempt at his language. He nodded, then spoke slowly in careful English. "Was. Before." The weight in those 2 words carried stories she could not yet understand, of a life interrupted, of choices that had led him to this solitary existence between 2 worlds that both rejected him. Over evening meals, their conversations deepened. He told her about his exile from the tribe, how he had refused to participate in raids against settlers, how his people saw this refusal as betrayal of their struggle for survival. She shared her own exile, the whispers that followed war widows who refused to remarry quickly, who insisted on keeping their dead husbands' names, who spoke of owning land and making decisions without male guidance. Both had been cast out by their people for refusing to become what others demanded. "We are same," Tall Thunder said one evening as fire burned low between them. Celestia nodded. 2 outcasts who had found the same refuge in this mountain sanctuary. The invisible line dividing their space disappeared entirely. They cooked together, shared stories of their different childhoods, laughed when her attempts at Comanche pronunciation twisted his words beyond recognition. Laughter transformed his face, erased the careful watchfulness that spoke of years spent expecting violence, made him appear younger despite the scars that marked his cheek. She began to understand that those scars came not from battle, but from mourning rituals, marks of grief for family lost to the endless war between his people and hers. Spring began its slow approach to the mountains. Ice melted from creek banks. Birds returned to nest in nearby pines. The land awakened from winter's grip with promises of new growth. Tall Thunder taught her to read weather signs in cloud formations, how to identify edible plants emerging from thawed ground, skills that would help her survive in this harsh country. She showed him techniques for preserving food, how to repair fabric and leather, knowledge gained from years of making little stretch into enough. They became partners in the work of living, each contributing skills the other lacked, building something together that neither could have created alone. One evening, Celestia found herself studying his profile as he tended the fire, the careful way he arranged burning logs, how he tested each flame's direction before adding fuel. Everything he did carried the same thoughtful precision, the same respect for tools and materials and the work itself. She had not expected to find such peace in another person's presence, had not imagined that sharing space could bring comfort rather than compromise. "I never knew love," Tall Thunder said quietly, still watching the flames dance. The words hung in air thick with wood smoke and unspoken possibilities. Celestia felt something shift inside her chest, a thawing that had nothing to do with changing seasons. "Neither did I," she replied. "Only duty. Marriage arranged by practical necessity, affection that never deepened into the connection she had heard other women whisper about. But sitting here in firelight with this gentle giant who spoke her language of exile, she began to understand what she had missed, what they both had missed. Spring brought more than warming earth. It brought understanding that grew between them in the space where words ended and something deeper began. Celestia woke each morning to the sound of Tall Thunder preparing coffee over the fire. His movements had become the rhythm of her days, the quiet certainty that someone else shared the work of existing. They planted a garden together in the plot he had prepared months before her arrival, her hands and his in the same soil, seeds that would grow into something neither could tend alone. He taught her to track deer through mountain meadows. She showed him how to preserve vegetables for winter storage. Each lesson an exchange of trust, of futures planned together. One evening, as purple shadows claimed the peaks around them, Tall Thunder spoke words that had been gathering weight for weeks. "I want to stay. With you." Celestia felt the truth of her own heart rise to meet his confession. "I want that too." They kissed beside the creek where he had saved her from drowning, water rushing over stones the only witness to their joining, two people who had never known love discovering it in each other's careful hands. For 3 weeks, happiness settled over the ranch. They worked side by side building chicken coops and mending fence lines, planning improvements that would carry them through another winter together. Tall Thunder carved furniture from fallen pine trees, a table where they could share meals, chairs fitted to their different heights, pieces that spoke of permanence rather than temporary shelter. Celestia sewed curtains from fabric saved in her traveling pack, bright cloth that transformed the cabin from shelter into home, colors that caught morning light and held it through mountain evenings. They spoke of the future in careful terms, how to register their claim with territorial authorities, whether to seek a preacher for marriage ceremonies, questions that assumed time stretched ahead of them without limit. Then dust appeared on the horizon. Tall Thunder spotted the riders first. His posture shifted from contentment to alertness in one fluid motion. The warrior beneath the gentle healer surfaced when danger approached. 6 men on horseback followed the creek toward their ranch. Too many for casual travelers, too purposeful for lost wanderers. "Stay inside," Tall Thunder told Celestia. She ignored him and fetched her rifle instead. The lead rider wore a sheriff's badge that caught afternoon sunlight. His face carried the hard lines of a man accustomed to violence. Behind him rode deputies whose eyes swept the landscape for threats. Sheriff Blackwood dismounted and studied the ranch with calculating gaze, his attention fixed on improvements that proved recent habitation, on signs that someone had claimed this abandoned property. "You Celestia Mayfield." His voice carried authority backed by the guns of his men. "I am. Got reports you're harboring a dangerous fugitive, Comanche killer named Tall Thunder." Blackwood gestured toward his men. They spread out to surround the cabin, hands resting on weapon grips. "Man's wanted for murdering the Harrison family over near Pueblo. Killed them all, even the children." The words hit Celestia with the force of winter wind. Children. The crime that justified any response from civilized people. Tall Thunder emerged from the barn where he had been working, his hands empty but his presence immediately dominating the space between the deputies and their target. "There he is," Blackwood said. "Big as life and twice as ugly." The sheriff's description matched wanted posters Celestia had seen in town, but those crude drawings had failed to capture the gentleness in Tall Thunder's eyes, the careful way he moved to avoid startling even small animals. "Harrison family," Blackwood continued. "Father, mother, 2 little girls. Found them scalped and mutilated in ways I won't describe in front of a lady." Celestia studied Tall Thunder's face for denial, for shock at hearing such accusations, found only resignation that spoke of a man who had heard these charges before. "You got proof?" she asked. Blackwood reached into his saddlebag and produced items that made her stomach clench. A child's doll, a woman's wedding ring, a man's pocket watch. Found these in a Comanche camp 2 days after the murders, along with witnesses who identified your friend here as the killer. The evidence spread across the sheriff's palm caught sunlight. Physical proof of lives destroyed, of innocence ended by violence. "Course, harboring a fugitive makes you accessory to murder," Blackwood added, "punishable by hanging in this territory." Celestia felt the weight of choice settle on her shoulders. Trust the man she had grown to love or believe the evidence of her own eyes? Tall Thunder spoke quietly in Comanche, words she had learned enough of his language to understand. "I am ready." Not denial, not protest of innocence. Acceptance of whatever fate awaited him. The man who had carved furniture for their future, who had kissed her beside rushing water, who had taught her that love could grow between the most unlikely people. Either a gentle healer wrongly accused, or a killer skilled enough to hide his true nature behind acts of kindness. Blackwood drew his pistol and aimed it at Tall Thunder's chest. "You coming peaceful, or do we do this the hard way?" Celestia raised her rifle and pointed it at the sheriff. "He's not going anywhere." 6 weapons swung toward her. The sound of hammers cocking filled the air between them. "That's a mistake you won't live to regret," Blackwood said. But Celestia had already made her choice. Right or wrong, she would stand with the man who had shown her what love meant, even if that love had been built on lies, even if the cost was everything. The standoff held for heartbeats that stretched toward eternity. 6 guns trained on Celestia, her rifle aimed at Sheriff Blackwood's chest, Tall Thunder motionless between them. "Tell me the truth," Celestia said without taking her eyes off Blackwood. "All of it." Tall Thunder spoke in the steady voice of a man facing his final moments. "I found the Harrison family, already dead. 3 days dead when I arrived." His words carried the weight of memory too heavy for lies. There was a child, a girl, still breathing, hidden under her mother's body. Blackwood's face shifted, a flicker of something that might have been fear. Tall Thunder continued speaking, each word measured and precise. "I tried to save her, carried her to my grandmother's people. She lived long enough to speak, to tell what she saw." "What did she see?" Celestia asked. "White men dressed as Comanche, speaking English, laughing while they killed." The admission hit the clearing between them, truth that changed everything or lies that sounded real enough to create doubt. "She described their leader," Tall Thunder said. "Scar across his left hand from knife fighting, missing tooth on the right side, voice that sounded like gravel." Celestia noticed Blackwood's left hand for the first time. A white scar ran from knuckle to wrist. When he spoke again, she heard the roughness Tall Thunder had described. Indian lies, Blackwood said. They'll say anything to save their necks. But his deputies had begun glancing at each other. Men who had followed orders without questioning their source. The girl drew pictures before she died, Tall Thunder continued. Showed the faces of the men who killed her family. Pictures I gave to federal marshals in Denver. Blackwood's gun hand trembled slightly. Federal marshals are coming, Tall Thunder said. Should arrive tomorrow. The sheriff's face went pale beneath his weathered tan. We're taking you in now, Blackwood said, before any marshals show up with their questions. But doubt had taken root among his men, the kind of doubt that made trigger fingers hesitate. Thunder rolled across distant peaks. Another storm approaching the mountains. Whether that would trap them all here until it passed. Tell them about your scar, Celestia said to Blackwood. Got it in the war. Which battle? Blackwood's hesitation lasted too long. Tell them about your missing tooth. The sheriff's mouth closed into a thin line. One of his deputies lowered his weapon slightly. Sheriff, the deputy said, maybe we should wait for them marshals. We got our orders, Blackwood snapped. From who? Celestia asked. Who's paying you to bring him in dead rather than alive? The question hung in air, growing thick with approaching storm. Rain began pattering on cabin roof. The same sound that had trapped her and Tall Thunder together months before. Hoofbeats echoed from the creek trail. New riders approaching through gathering dusk. 7 horses this time. Men wearing federal badges that caught dying sunlight. Behind them rode someone Celestia had not expected to see. A young woman with haunted eyes and Comanche dress. She dismounted and walked directly to Tall Thunder. Uncle, she said in English accented by her adopted tribe's language. Tall Thunder's face transformed. Joy replaced resignation. Sarah Harrison, he said, you live. The last member of the murdered family, the child he had tried to save. Now grown and bearing witness to truth that had hidden in darkness for 2 years. Sarah turned toward Blackwood with eyes that held the fury of the orphaned. That is the man who killed my family. Her finger pointed directly at the sheriff. I watched him shoot my father, heard him laugh when my mother begged for our lives. Federal Marshal Williams stepped forward with arrest warrants already prepared. Sheriff Blackwood, you're under arrest for murder and conspiracy. Blackwood's hand moved toward his gun. His deputies stepped away from him, men who had followed a killer without knowing his true nature. The Harrison girl identified you from drawings she made, Marshal Williams continued, along with your associates. We've been tracking your gang for months. The truth emerged in pieces. Blackwood and his men had been raiding settlements while disguised as Comanche, splitting the stolen goods and bounty money collected for crimes they committed themselves. Tall Thunder had become their convenient scapegoat, a lone Comanche whose exile made him easy to blame for their violence. You framed an innocent man, Celestia said. Innocent? Blackwood laughed bitterly. He's still a savage. Still doesn't belong on white land with white women. Marshal Williams shackled the sheriff while his men surrendered their weapons. Territory doesn't see color when it comes to legal ownership, Williams said. Miss Mayfield's deed is valid, as is her right to choose her own company. Sarah Harrison approached Celestia and Tall Thunder where they stood beside their cabin. He saved my life, she said, carried me to safety when I should have died with my family. She looked around at the ranch they had built together, the garden they had planted, the home they had created from abandoned land and shared hope. You have made something good here, Sarah continued, something my family would have wanted to see. Rain began falling in earnest, the storm that would wash away the last traces of Blackwood's deception. Federal marshals loaded their prisoners onto horses for the journey back to territorial court. Justice, that had taken 2 years to arrive, but had finally found its way to their mountain sanctuary. Celestial and Tall Thunder watched the riders disappear into gathering darkness. 2 people who had found love despite every obstacle their worlds had placed between them. The truth had set them free. 6 months after Blackwood's arrest, the ranch had grown beyond anything Celestia had imagined when she first stepped through that cabin door. Federal compensation for the injustice done to Tall Thunder had provided funds for expansion. More importantly, it had brought official recognition of their right to exist here together. The territorial government granted them clear title to the land, papers signed by judges who acknowledged that love recognized no boundaries drawn by prejudice or fear. Their garden flourished in mountain soil enriched by careful tending, rows of vegetables that would feed them through another winter, proof that two people working together could make barren ground productive. But the greatest change was not in the land itself. It was in the people who had found their way to this sanctuary. Marcus Washington arrived first, a freed slave whose skills as a blacksmith made him valuable anywhere, but whose color made him unwelcome in most places. Celestia and Tall Thunder offered him space to build a forge, partnership rather than employment. Then came Elena Ramirez, a Mexican woman whose husband had died in border conflicts. She brought knowledge of herbal medicine that complemented Tall Thunder's healing practices. Together, they tended ailments that territorial doctors refused to treat. James Two Bears followed in late summer, a Cherokee man displaced by government removal policies. His carpentry skills transformed the single cabin into a cluster of buildings that housed their growing community. Each arrival followed the same pattern: outcasts seeking sanctuary finding instead belonging, people who had been told they did not fit discovering they fit together perfectly. Sarah Harrison visited monthly. The young woman had chosen to live among the Comanche who raised her after Tall Thunder saved her life. But she served as translator and negotiator when conflicts arose between their community and territorial authorities. "You have built something my parents would have loved," she told Celestia during one visit, "a place where people are judged by their actions rather than their appearance." The ranch became known throughout the territory as a place where the unwanted could find acceptance, where skills mattered more than skin color or tribal affiliation, where families formed from choice rather than blood. Celestia taught reading and writing to anyone who asked. Her classroom was the main cabin where she had first encountered Tall Thunder. Children of different backgrounds learned together around the same table where she and her husband had shared their first meals. Tall Thunder's medical practice drew patients from hundreds of miles away. His reputation as a healer spread among communities that official doctors refused to serve. He saved lives without asking about politics or prejudices. Their wedding took place in the meadow where they had planted their first garden together. Sarah Harrison performed the ceremony using words from both Cherokee and Comanche traditions. Marcus Washington played fiddle music learned from plantation celebrations. Elena Ramirez prepared feast dishes that honored all their different cultures. No government official attended. No church sanctioned the union. But the land itself seemed to bless their joining as mountain peaks caught sunset light and painted the sky in colors too beautiful for human creation. They built a school that fall, the first integrated classroom in the territory. Children learned reading and arithmetic alongside lessons in different languages and customs, education that prepared them for a world larger than the prejudices of their parents. Winter brought challenges that tested their community bonds, blizzards that trapped them together for weeks at a time, food shortages that required careful rationing, illnesses that demanded everyone contribute to nursing the sick back to health. But they survived through cooperation rather than competition, through shared resources and shared responsibility, through the understanding that individual survival depended on collective success. Spring returned with news that Blackwood had been executed for his crimes. Justice that closed the chapter on false accusations and manufactured evidence. Vindication that came too late for some victims but prevented future ones. Celestia stood on the porch of their expanded home and watched children play in the yard. Brown faces and white faces and red faces learning games that belonged to all their traditions. Laughter that recognized no boundaries drawn by adult fears. Tall Thunder emerged from his workshop, where he had been crafting furniture for new arrivals. His hands carried the sawdust of productive labor, the satisfaction of building rather than destroying. They had created something unprecedented in territorial history, a community where outcasts became leaders, where difference was celebrated rather than feared, where love had grown into something larger than romance. The setting sun painted their mountain sanctuary in gold and crimson, light that touched all faces equally regardless of the prejudices that waited beyond their borders. "We did this," Celestia said quietly. Tall Thunder nodded and placed his arm around her shoulders. Together, the word carried weight earned through seasons of shared struggle, through moments when trust seemed impossible but had been chosen anyway, through the discovery that love between two people could become love that embraced many. Their story had begun with confrontation and fear, two strangers trapped together by circumstances beyond their control. It had grown into something that changed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone who found refuge in their chosen family. The mountains held their sanctuary in protective embrace, peaks that had witnessed the collision of two worlds and the creation of something entirely new, a place where belonging was earned through kindness rather than inherited through blood. Night settled over the ranch that had become home to the homeless. Stars emerged in patterns that belonged to all cultures and none. Light that shone on a community built from the radical idea that people could choose their own families. Celestia and Tall Thunder remained on their porch long after the children had been called inside. Two people who had found love in the most unlikely circumstances and used it to build hope for others seeking the same impossible dream. The mountain black woman and the giant Comanche had moved beyond their individual stories into something larger, something that proved love could indeed conquer the prejudices that divided their world. Their ranch stood as testament to the possibility of change, to the hope that outcasts could become pioneers of acceptance, to the truth that families formed by choice often proved stronger than those bound by tradition. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.